Hey guys, how you doing? It's me, and today we're gonna be forcing my friend Iffy to play like 8 different Scratch games over a span of time that's unreasonably long, because I procrastinated a ton and made really dumb decisions. Yeah, also, I ended up getting really unlucky with this video. My mic broke for like a solid month. Like, the good mic that you saw in the SNES review. And now I have to use this mic, because I've been trying to fix it for like a month, and it's just not working, and now, um, And, anyway.
Whoever's watching this, please get me out of here. I never agreed to this. I don't want to play these games. Please just help me.
Hey, can you, shut up for a second? I'm trying to do an intro.
Get me out of here.
Listen, it's really early in the morning right now. I'm trying to get this done. Can you just please shut up for, the duration of the video? And, I'll give you $5, you dumb child.
We're the same age, but okay. Anyways, hey everyone. I'm Iffy. You probably remember me as the guy who made Stanley's or the admin on Ender's server. But nonetheless, I'm here to judge these games.
If you already know what to do, just look in the description of the video chapters if you already, know how everything works, that kind of thing. Skip this part, but be warned, some things have changed, so it may be good to check up again. Also, if you're one of the premiere watchers, screw you can't skip anything, sucks to suck!
If some of you may remember, Ender decided to host his final game jam a few months ago, and it was by far the biggest one yet. We had around 17 games to play, and that's only the first bracket. Quick disclaimer, if you were invited to the Game Jam studio and you finished your game but you don't see it on this bracket, it was probably in the second bracket, which will be reviewed later in a future video, and was not disqualified unless we specifically said in the Discord server that it was.
Oh yeah, and before we actually get into these games, allow me to explain how these game jams work, and how this specific one works as well, because it works slightly differently to the past two ones, especially considering the fact that it's being split up into multiple parts. Essentially, we have a collection of games made in a certain time period for the game jam. We put them in a bracket like you would do in any other tournament, and judge them accordingly based off of what game each game is put up against. By the end of it, there's only one winner. But this game jam is different, namely because instead of one bracket, there's actually two. Well, there is three technically, but the third one's mostly just like a glorified finals round. It's really not that big, except for the fact that it's, the finals round. Nothing important.
So there's no games on the third bracket yet, but there will be at the end of this video and at the end of the second bracket.
Speaking of the first and second brackets, they both work in a very, very similar but slightly different way to the previous game jams. Essentially, there is two brackets consisting of games. That much is probably obvious. I mean, this is an Ender Game Jam competition. I don't know why anyone wouldn't expect that. Anyway, though, the main difference, though, is that the last two games present by the end don't actually face off against one another. Rather, they move on to the third bracket and are going to be one of the 4 games that eventually compete for first place.
To explain the final bracket, it will consist of the 4 games that won the previous 2 brackets. It will be a full, in-depth analysis of each game to find the true winner. Whichever 2 games lose the first round of the final bracket will compete for third place, and the winners of the first round will move on to the final showdown to see who is the ultimate winner.
By the end, there's going to be only one winner, but the top 3 people will actually receive some benefit. All the top 3 people will be given a chance to make a video with me all together, maybe playing some games or talking about something, I don't know. The winner, however, will get one of their games played by me, or at least maybe a game they recommend, or something along those kinds of lines. You get it. And not to mention, the winner will get personally followed on Scratch by me, so if you want some of my somewhat decent clout, make sure to win this one. Anyway, Iffy, I think it's about time we get into these games, because we've got 35 games in this whole game jam, and 17 or so in this bracket alone. We better get into this, or else it's going to take a full hour to do.
I still stand by my claim that I don't want to do this, but hey, $5 is $5. Let's do this.
Welcome to the part of the video where I explain the games in a tiny bit of detail. The explanations we're going to be giving here are going to be super tiny considering how many games we have to go through. So if you want a more accurate understanding of each of the games, go play them yourself. Anyway, starting off with the first game we have tried out on the list, Cat's Cafe. Cat's Cafe is a decent experience at first, but it has a few issues going into it. Namely, all the models appear to be recolors, which is really unappealing. Plus, the game overall is pretty buggy, and this game has a whole game-breaking bug where this cat appears on your screen and never leaves, meaning that the game is just sort of unbeatable. Besides that, it's sort of a standard experience with pretty subpar gameplay and a poor explanation of its mechanics. There's not really too much to say because the game's literally broken.
Next we have Peekaboo, and needless to say, I was really excited when I first opened up this game. It had it all. Good art, good atmosphere, and an overall vibe to it that it actually stuck to. But then I played the game and the animatronic never attacked? I'm not sure if this is because the game was overly randomized or the creator never added an AI or accidentally bugged it. But yeah, I beat this game without ever being attacked. Good game with a lot of promise, but it got ruined by the fact that there's really no gameplay.
Next we have Operation Rocky, a game that somewhat works, and hey, wait a minute, this menu reminds me of something. And this clock. And the oxygen mechanic. Hey, wait a sec. All jokes aside, Operation Rocky is a pretty solid game. The gameplay is, well, half decent to say the least. It has a decent tracker system and an oxygen system, which created a cool dynamic in the game with closing doors whenever the animatronics get too close. It's got a bunch of bugs, however, which sort of tanked the experience. Namely, I got killed once, but I somehow survived. I don't know if this was done by intention or not, but I basically won by doing nothing.
Now here's another game, Last Day Alive at Oliver's. The game's title gave it an interesting premise, but upon further inspection, the game is very... oh no, not this stuff again. All jokes aside, the game was pretty... eh? The art was very undetailed, and besides a really smooth door animation, there's nothing in this game that really stuck out to me. It's mostly just your average FNAF game with a little extra things sprinkled in. There was also barely any sound, which made the game feel very awkward at times. Overall, the game was pretty boring to say the least, and doesn't really have that much going for it.
Moving on, we have The Shift, and let's just get this over with. This game's like a maze of glitches and weird design details. The extras menu doesn't do anything at all, and seems sort of pointless. Maybe it has unlockable content, but unlocking anything is impossible, because the game is impossible! After a certain point in time, the screen just turns red and the game is unplayable. We tried everything to fix this, but nothing works. Maybe we're both just really dumb, and we're missing something, but the game is unplayable and has a lot of poor design details.
Now we've got The Elevator, a game with a very good atmosphere, and an interesting mechanic of going through different floors on an elevator. I was very pleased with this game. It had a very old-timey vibe and some very cool 3D graphics, even though they were a little jarring after just coming out of a black and white old movie title screen. My only problem? What am I supposed to do? There was little hints and clues to do everything, but the system to have to enter codes to access certain things just felt very unnecessary. The fact that there's no numbers on the number pad doesn't really help this either. A lot of the games in this bracket have tutorials to introduce the new mechanics, and this is a game that really lacked one. The mechanic to have to make as little noise as possible is cool though, and if it was a little more fleshed out, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. Overall, I enjoy this game, however it was a little too gimmicky and very confusing on top of it all.
Next up, we have Outlet, which is actually a really nice game. It appears to be a standard FNAF game at first, with doors and cameras. That is, until you consider the game's featured mechanic, cables, and outlets, as the name would suggest. A key feature in this game is the power box. This power box, as you expect, has a set of power to use, but also has different cables. This means you have to plug in certain things into the power box to work, like the doors, cameras. If this wasn't interesting enough, you can actually physically move the box around to be closer to the places you need to be, plugging in cables as you see fit. It's a great twist on the average FNAF experience, which is why Outlet is actually a pretty solid experience. My one major criticism with the game is the art design. I think it looks really weird, as some of the animatronics look very odd, and that does sort of ruin a lot of the immersion. Nonetheless, a really decent game.
Twilight Ascent is a game that had a really nice idea, but was not executed very well. The whole idea behind this game is that the main character is having horrible nightmares after suffering some trauma, and the game plays the character reimagining it and explaining it to his therapist. It starts out as a normal FNAF game, but then goes into multiple different minigames in the forms of different doors that you walk through. I like the idea of the different minigames, but reusing the door idea for the rest of the nights was a little of a letdown. Overall, I enjoyed this game, the only issues really being crappy art and a few bugs on the side.
And now, the explanation for Crimson Dream. Crimson Dream is a really well-polished game that honestly checks almost all the marks of a good game. Good mechanics that are easily recognizable and stable, good art and good models, and a good atmosphere going from the warning screen to the menu to the actual game itself. This game has an interesting mechanic where instead of limiting camera usage by a power meter, it does so by an arbitrary timer that goes up the more you use it. If it reaches 10, you have to reset your camera phone thing with this power handle. This makes an interesting fast-paced strategy dynamic that works really well for the game. Its one major flaw is the fact that the game is really sort of slow, with animatronics taking a while to move around on the first few nights. Though this may improve later on, it just really doesn't leave a good impression at first.
Now there's Welcome to the Fun Palace. This one had a consistent art style that works with the overall vibe of the restaurant. The phone guy was way more annoying than he usually is, and the intro was very weird. The game was mostly just boring and had very slow pacing, causing it to not be really that investing of a playthrough. There's also no sound cues for the animatronics entering your office, which caused the game to keep on edge, not really in a good way. It was also very annoying to have to constantly check if the characters were there, and would have been way more engaging if the game just gave me a small cue to know when I was about to die.
Glorious Garden is a game that is, well, subpar to say the least, but it knows this well and honestly just rolls with it in the best way possible. I love this game. It's a quick 5-minute in and out experience where you water a plant, throw a rock at a guy, and fill up a can. Clearly designed as a joke game, and honestly again just rolls with it really well and makes for a kind of funny experience. It's also surprisingly almost entirely glitchless.
My can is full. Now there's Tomato Town. And let me just put a disclaimer to anyone wanting to play this game. Please, please turn off the jump scares. I think I almost got an epileptic seizure playing this game. I am not joking. I had the lights on my room, and the jump scare still lit up my room in a flashing frenzy. Apart from the incredibly unnecessary jump scare flashing, the game had some decent pacing. The fact that there's no office scrolling threw me off a little bit, but the game mostly just revolved around the cameras anyway, so it wasn't necessary. The tomato killing you if you look at the cameras is a little too quick, and him going on the cameras that you have to look at was definitely too much. But overall, it was definitely a good game with good pacing that should definitely fix the jump scares.
Doggo Nuts at Roberts is what we're talking about now, and let's just get it out of the way. This is a really basic game. It has 2 decent models, but the mechanics are just really non-existent, I'm gonna be honest. All you really do is just wait for one of the 2 doggos to appear at the doors, and you put on a mask. That is really all there is to it. It's not even a case of just the first night being bad, considering it's the only night, despite the title implying it has multiple nights.
Next, we have custom amount of weeks in the game jam, and I gotta say, this one is very meta. You have a game where you have to make a game jam game, the game itself being made in a game jam. I like the idea though. The execution of having to make the game though is definitely lousy though. Clicking on a button that just shrinks every 10 seconds is very counterintuitive considering I had almost no idea how far progressed I was into the tasks. Even just an arbitrary number that went up would have helped, or if the rectangle grew to show how much longer you had instead of shrinking. The idea behind this game is really cool though. Would have been a lot more better if the making games mechanic was better executed.
Night at the Park is honestly a game that had a lot of potential and did actually use some of that potential to make a decent experience. It has an interesting signal mechanic for your in-game phone, which you do use to close doors, though it's not really difficult enough to matter and it's sort of a letdown. Besides that, the game has a lot of decent art and just, fine mechanics. Besides that though, it's sort of buggy and has many issues. Also, whenever you die, there's no way of getting back to where you were. For example, if you were to die on night 4, you're forced to return to night 1, which I heavily dislike. Besides this, Night at the Park is an overall standard, mostly mediocre game that has some potential to be good. It's pretty much decent all across the board.
Now we're moving on to 1998, and sorry for sounding like a broken record, but this one definitely had a lot of potential, ruined by game-breaking bugs and overall poor game design. I really like the different game difficulties, and the medkit mechanic was a cool idea, but it definitely had way too many uses. It would have been interesting if the medkit had less uses to harder the difficulty, and the mechanic being that easy just sort of ruined the whole concept. There's also a game-breaking bug where a character, after you get rid of it, just stays there. It never goes away, and just ruins your vision for the rest of the night. I would have loved this game if it wasn't so broken, and had a few more limitations to make the medkit mechanic actually useful. Imagine if Nightmare difficulty only had 0 to 1 medkit uses. Oh boy.
And finally, we have the shift of the show, kids, and well, what is there to say about this game? Well, not much actually, it's just a standard FNAF experience. I keep saying this, but I'm gonna be honest right now, this is about as close as it gets with a few minor exceptions. Unlike FNAF, this game is very slow paced, at least for the first few nights, and it's genuinely very boring to play. By the time we completed night 2, we just wanted to stop. In fact, during the entirety of night 1 and 2, I was attacked a grand total of 2 times, 1 for each night, which is severely broken. Besides that though, it had an interesting RNG mechanic with recharging power, where it would recharge it fully, but only 50% of the time. This game honestly has a lot going for it and is very polished, but like a lot of other games here, is ruined by how slow it is and genuinely boring it is for the player. So then, boom, that was all the games. Yeah, I get it, took a while, right? Well, this part's always necessary, because I guarantee you, like 2.5 of you guys have actually played any of these games. And if I had no explanation included here, there would be riots in the comments about not knowing what any of these games are even about.
Am I done yet? Can we please go out of the basement?
No iffy, we're only like 20% of the way done. Prepare for more torture over the next few days, hours, as we spend more time doing nothing but a dumb video.
Oh, you gotta be fun.
Now then, moving on. Alright, so I'm pretty sure you already know what this all is. I've done 2 other Game Jam videos already, and even if you haven't seen them, you should know this is a bracket. We've got 17 games on this list, and by the end of it, there will only be 2 games that move on to the final bracket.
So, first off, we have a 3-way battle. Cat's Cafe, Operation Rocky, and The Shift. Even though these are 3 games, do not be fooled. Only one of them will move on to the next bracket, so let's piece these games apart.
I think the best way to start this off is by approaching and comparing all of these 3 games' features and qualities, and seeing how, out of the 3, which is the best. Let's start off with Cat's Cafe. Cat's Cafe is a game that at first seems like it can be decent. However, as discussed earlier, it's got a game-breaking bug, or at least some kind of mechanic that we just don't understand, that makes the game borderline unplayable. Operation Rocky, the second game in this 3-way battle, is much less buggy as a whole in terms of the game experience, and has, well, some stuff to offer. Even if it is less buggy than Cat's Cafe, it's not really hard to make a game that's less buggy than game-breaking. That is to say, Operation Rocky is beatable, but it is still buggy, as a whole. Plus, the general feel of the game is sort of empty, but if I'm being honest, when you get down to it, this is a decent experience when compared to the other 2 games in this. The Shift is the 3rd game in this sequence, and would you look at that, it's also broken. That being said, Operation Rocky wins. I kinda wish there was a little more to say, but we're comparing a game that's sort of empty with maybe a few bugs to the games that are literally impossible to beat, as far as we know. And trust me, we have tried a lot, so I'd be genuinely surprised if there was something we've overlooked. But anyway, as it stands right now, Operation Rocky moves on. The Shift and Cat's Cafe do not. That was a really that was a really easy level, goddamn.
Bit annoying that this game had to be pitted against 2 broken games, but hey, if it moves on to bracket 2, then bracket 2 it shall go.
Yeah, I just said that, Iffy. Congratulations on repeating me. Now, the next on the list of games, we have a very interesting matchup that I personally have been looking forward to. Outlet and Crimson Dream.
As per usual, let's show the parts of the games that do go well, and some of their drawbacks. Starting off with Outlet, there's a lot to say about this game. It is probably one of the best mechanics I've seen in a FNAF game in a while, and stays consistent with its theming throughout the length of the game. It also has a very compact and well-designed extras menu. The title screen is also really cool. Now here's the main issue, the animatronic models. Some of them are pretty poorly designed. Also a small gripe, but something I'd like to point out, the title screen music is just not that great. Now we have Crimson Dawn, another solid game. The art is really nice.
Not to mention, we found the mechanic that limits the time you spend on the camera to be pretty enjoyable, and a good idea.
It definitely feels pretty eerie, and the theming is also very consistent here. It has a neat concept, but definitely a critical issue is present. The nights are sluggish. Even up to night 3, it still took forever for the character to actually attack us. That being said, it's definitely a hard matchup to be made here. Both are incredibly solid games that just happen to be matchups so incredibly early. You have 2 games of solid mechanics held down by the animatronic AIs. So when it comes to judging them, it's hard to choose.
We definitely didn't really want to make any choice between these games, not this early on at least, but judging the few aspects of the game that are better than in the other game, we can safely say that Outlet makes the cut just slightly more than Crimson Dream. Again, tough choice, but a choice does have to be made. Our reasoning for this happens to be the fact that, well, Outlet, it's a pretty good game, and while Crimson Dream definitely has the atmosphere, and certain aspects are actually executed very well, Outlet as a whole seems to be a lot more enjoyable, at least to us, and that's why Outlet moves on to the next match, while Crimson Dream does not. Alright, let's go on to match number 3. We have Doggo Knights at Roberts going up against Lords of Garden. And for anyone that has played either game, they'll know a winner out of these 2 is actually very obvious. Let's compare them. Lords Garden is essentially a joke game, but it executes its gameplay actually pretty well, even if it's not exactly the best game. It's a short, 5-minute in-and-out experience, and doesn't really sell itself as anything more, which in my opinion is what makes the game so interesting. It doesn't try to be some massive game, it's just a simple, fun experience.
Now we have Doggo Knights at Roberts, and this game has barely anything going for it compared to Lords Garden. Doggo Knights has one mechanic that both animatronics fall for, and while it tries to limit your time on the mask, it ultimately fails. The art is decent, but that's all I can really say, to be honest. The game just doesn't really have anything that sticks out or intrigues us at all.
And I gotta say, these sorts of quick matches are easy to decide. but it's not really fun overall, considering I like to see some more interesting and overall closer battles. Anyway, without further ado, it's safe to say that Glorthgard moves on, and Dagonetsa Roberts does not.
Not a surprising victory for this matchup, but not one that I was expecting for this game overall. Now we have Knights at the Park versus the Shift with the Show Kids. Starting off with Knights at the Park, it had a neat mechanic where certain areas didn't allow you to use your phone at different points in the night, as well as a very cool menu. The issues? There was lots of bugs we encountered through the experience, and the game also completely erased all of your progress if you died or clicked the green flag. Now there's the Shift with the Show Kids, an overall decent game that ruined itself with some questionable pacing. It relies on pre-established FNAF mechanics to create an overall mushpot of different mechanics to fit the game. Night 1, nobody attacked us, and every other night was just really slow. When it comes to judging the games, Knights at the Park was just the better experience. It had a new mechanic, the signal areas, and while buggy, paces itself decently well. Shift with the Show Kids would have been better if it wasn't so slow and boring. Knights at the Park moves on to the next bracket, while Shift with the Show Kids does not.
I definitely agree with that statement, and I honestly believe that Shift with the Show Kids actually probably would have moved on to the next set of matches if its earlier nights weren't so just boring. It's just not a very fun experience, and it's genuinely one of the most boring FNAF games I've played in a while. No offense to the developer, but it's just really slow. For the fifth matchup, we have Last Day Alive at Oliver's going up against Peekaboo, and at first glance, while some people may be inclined to say one or the other side wins, there's more to it when you get down to it and actually observe the mechanics of these games and see how these work overall. Peekaboo starts off with a really actually well-polished game with a good set of mechanics, and it works pretty well with that. It just, during our playthrough, we never got attacked once, which indicates either poor pacing or just really bad RNG. Either way, it's not very good to have a game with poor pacing or one that relies on too much RNG, so neither situation is particularly good. Ignoring that, as I've stated, this game has a good atmosphere, which still goes a pretty long way, even if the gameplay itself means you might never get attacked. Still though, you can't really overlook that. Oliver's is quite the contrary, considering its atmosphere is quite poor, but well, you actually get attacked in this game, so you have some actual engagement. The fact that the comparison between these two games relies on these two factors sort of means that it just kinda relies on whichever game has more positive factors to it than negative, rather than any of these games riding off of one particular mechanic or idea, because these games just can't really do it. Back to Oliver's. It stands up pretty well as a game, but the animatronics are sort of slow, which makes the game really easy. Plus, while the animation of this game is not that bad, the art itself could actually be worked on.
Peekaboo could have easily won due to its atmosphere and art, but fell back due to the fact that it had crappy RNG and bad pacing. Either of those wouldn't have helped the game anyway. If there's gonna be one night, that night has to be fast. Last Day Live at Oliver's moves on to the next set of matches. Peekaboo does not. Now we have the Elevator versus Twilight Ascent, and I definitely have a lot to say about both of these games. Both would easily be picks that I'd expect to get decently far, so let's see which one comes out on top. In terms of art, there's definitely a very clear winner here, but let's look into this. Twilight Ascent's art is... yeah? It's definitely very underpolished, and I think the creator could have put a lot more time and effort into the art here. The Elevator has 3D graphics entirely made in Blender, to my knowledge, and while some of you may say the two games aren't comparable in 2D and 3D respectively, the fact that Twilight Ascent's art appears to have little to no effort, and the creator of the Elevator clearly cared enough about the art to create a three-dimensional environment, easily negates the fact that it's hard to compare either game's art. So for the art department, the Elevator easily gets my pick.
Now let's take a look at the actual gameplay, because as far as art goes, the actual gameplay of the game is what's more important, and Elevator wins again. I don't know what else to say. Now, alright, let me explain, alright? Actually, wait, hold up, what do I even have to explain? If you played Twilight Ascent, while it does have some interesting concepts, having each night be some sort of mini-games to access through these doors, past night 1 of course. The gameplay is overall sort of unpolished, and while this is definitely a more loose criticism, there's definitely not as much immersion in the experience, which sort of leaves it bland. Not to mention, the gameplay, as a side effect of the little immersion itself, is overall uninteresting. This game definitely could have been more interesting if more time was put into making the individual parts of the game more interesting, however much content the game might have. In comparison, Elevator has a much more solid experience that is generally more enjoyable to the average player. It does have some pretty convoluted mechanics that are a bit of a turn-off in terms of interest in the game, but overall, it is a pretty solid experience when compared to Twilight Ascent. It has multiple parts to it, like being in an elevator going down and the phase afterwards where you play the actual game. However, once again, the mechanics are a bit convoluted, and this game definitely could have benefited from a tutorial.
So because of these reasons, the elevator is the one that makes that on top. I honestly would have enjoyed Twilight Ascent as a concept if its art wasn't so bad and the gameplay continued adapting beyond the second night. The elevator as a whole is a much better experience, despite its glaring issues still.
The point is, elevator moves on, Twilight Ascent does not. The second last matchup is between Welcome to the Fun Palace and Tomato Town. I would normally talk about the actual art and gameplay first, because that's actually how you judge two games in these kinds of brackets, but we need to talk about Tomato Town. Specifically, the jump scares. Do not play this game if you can't handle flashing lights. Alright, I get it. A lot of FNAF games have flashing lights. Well, actually, a lot of them don't and add the warning for no reason, but just go along with this. But for the most part, they aren't that bad. The jump scares in this game will give you seizures. The flashing lights are genuinely insane whenever you die.
I cannot emphasize just how bad the flashing lights are. To put it into perspective, while I was playing the game, I got jump scared for the first time, right? The lights were on in my room and it was noon, and yet it still lit up my whole room. I really want to emphasize this so that the creator can realize this and make the warning genuinely obvious.
Okay, now that that rant's over, let's look at the actual games. Welcome to the Fun Palace, like we said before, is a sort of mediocre game. It's kind of down the middle and is overall very, well, no point in sugarcoating it. It's kind of a boring experience, I'm gonna be honest. It's a very inoffensive game where you can't really hate it, but it's hard to find it that good of a game either. It's just stuck in an uncanny valley where you can't really dislike it for much, but you can't really like it for much either. In comparison, Tomato Town, besides the seizure-inducing flashing lights you get every jump scare, is actually not that bad of a game.
The pacing of the game was definitely really good, especially when you compare it to most games in this game jam, where the pacing was either too slow or simply no pacing at all. To have a game where you're constantly being attacked, and being attacked at reasonable times at that, is definitely a breath of fresh air after waiting for 6 in-game, and to be honest, also real life, hours for one character to barely make it to the front door. The simplicity of this game also would have been a detriment at first glance, but the pacing works so well that it definitely makes up for it. There's only a handful of mechanics, all revolving around one TV, but the characters attack you at such reasonable pace that you never really notice the fact that you're hardly doing anything. Overall, while Welcome to the Fun Palace isn't really a bad game, and would definitely crush some of the other games in this bracket, it does not compare to Tomato Town, and thus Tomato Town moves on to the next round, while Welcome to the Fun Palace does not. Finally, we have custom amount of weeks of the Game Jam going up against 1998. If any of you remember the explanations at the beginning, 1998 was a one-night game with an interesting mechanic, that being the medkit idea, while custom amount of weeks at the Game Jam, I'll just call it the custom night game from here on out, had a few different mechanics, the main one being that you had to develop a Game Jam game, in which, ironically, the game was made in a Game Jam. That being said, I think it's safe to say that the Custom Night is the better game, but let's dive into this to explain why. First off, 1998 has a few mechanics, the main ones being a mask that repels both animatronics, a health meter, which goes down as you use your mask, and a medkit which has 5 uses and regenerates your health when used. While the medkit is an interesting idea, it's definitely underused. Imagine tons of small animatronics that attack you in small bursts and slowly chip away your health, or an animatronic that halves your health but never fully kills you. I had so many ideas for how the medkit could be used, but once going into the game, yeah, it's just for the mask, and that's it.
When it comes to the custom night game, it has its own set of unique mechanics. Aside from all the regular stuff you accept from a FNAF game, this one also has you develop a game through a series of tasks you have to do. It is kind of a confusing ordeal, as the GUI for it is a bit odd, as we mentioned earlier, but besides that, I have no real complaints as a whole. It has good art on top of that, making it a complete experience. So which game is better? Well, first, you must consider the mechanics. Both games have interesting mechanics that stand out from the rest of the crowd, which makes a comparison more difficult to draw based on that point. Besides this, almost every aspect comparing the games goes in favor of the custom night game. It has better art, undoubtedly. It looks genuinely nicer and has smoother animation. Overall, it's just a much more fulfilling experience, with 1998, which is full of bugs and issues, kind of making the game genuinely annoying to play at almost any point in the game that isn't like a minute after start. Because of this, it's safe to say that while 1998 is by no means a necessarily bad game, it just doesn't mean the same standard of smoothness as its competitor. The custom amount of weeks of the Game Jam moves on to the next round. 1998 does not. Whew, that was a lot of games. I say this every time I host a Game Jam, but I feel really bad for kicking off a lot of the games, because a lot of games here were actually really good, just not good enough to beat the games they're competing against, I guess. With this in mind, we still have to move on, or else we'll never get this done. Ify, you have anything to say?
Yep, you know, I am kind of starting to get comfortable in this basement. I'm a little thirsty though. Could I please have some water?
Paid you $5, is that not enough?
I mean, yeah, but I still need some water.
Anyway, with half the games gone, the next round is going to be a lot shorter. Even if that's the case, there's still going to be a lot of interesting matchups going up. Right after this intermission, roll the Andrew dancing clip.
Hey guys, Ender went to the bathroom. I think this is my time to plead for one of you to please free me from this basement. Ender's address is...
Intermission over. Welcome back to Ender's Super Late Game Jam that took me like 4 months to make. We've got half the games left, but still a full video of content left to go. So with that in mind, here's what the bracket is now. Let's go. Coming up, we have Operation Rocky up top, and we have Outlet up bottom. Up bottom? What? Anyway, now we have to battle to see which one comes out on top. If you remember the very first set of games we had, in the first part of the bracket, we talked about how they were all, well, to put it lightly, kinda subpar, and Operation Rocky was no exception to this. It just happened to be the best game from the bunch. Sure, Operation Rocky might be a decent experience that works like maybe half the time. When compared to Outlet, a game with a lot more unique mechanics, has less bugs, as far as me and Iffy are aware of course, it just really cannot compete. I wish there was more to say, maybe we could compare art or some other factor, but genuinely none of those other factors matter enough when you're talking about a game with game-breaking exploits in the game compared to a game with a unique mechanic and various other features that make it a fun experience. It just can't compete. Yes, I know, not the best start to this set of matches, but there's just nothing else to say.
Therefore, Outlet moves on to the third bracket, while Operation Rocky does not. Now we have Glort's Garden going up against Night at the Park. While you guys might already have your opinions on which game should win, when it comes to fully judging these games for us, well, these games are hard to judge. The reason being, they aren't really comparable. You have a short, fun little joke game versus a serious game with more overall content, albeit having a few bugs. Genuinely, what can you hate Glort's Garden for? It's fun, it's quick, and it doesn't take itself seriously. But it doesn't just use that as an excuse for it to be a bad game. Considering how small of a game Glort's Garden is, there isn't really much to mess up, which is likely why it's so easy to praise it. Nights at the Park, on the other hand, is a much bigger game with more content, which ended up attracting some pretty glaring bugs. So while I definitely enjoyed Glort's Garden more, Nights at the Park is an overall much better game when judging the two.
I mean, better is kind of a weird term to use here. I just think it's a more, complete experience that is more true to FNAF than Glort's Garden is. I mean, in Glort's Garden, all you do is just you click around, that's the whole game. Nights at the Park has more content to it and more stuff you can enjoy and more stuff to play. And when you have a game as small as Glort's Garden, this just really isn't a lot to do, right? It's just a game that you play once and never again, which in my opinion makes Night in the Park win this matchup. Nights at the Park wins this matchup and moves on. Now next up we have Last Day Live at Oliver's versus The Elevator, and wow, I gotta say, this is a really interesting matchup. Both games are decent in their own respects, though at the same time both have some pretty glaring issues, which is how we'll decide a winner here. Actually, more accurately, one of these games is kinda mediocre in its own way, while the other is good. Which game am I talking about? Well, Last Day Live at Oliver's, of course, you should have expected it already. Oliver's is kind of like a lot of other games on this list where it isn't necessarily bad, it just could be a lot better. It's a regular FNAF game with extra things sprinkled in, that's it. There's not a lot of interesting things to it, even if it's a generally formidable and recognizable experience, which is not something a lot of other games on this list can actually say they have. And while yes, Elevator did have its own issues, those were relatively minuscule compared to the issues Oliver's has from its art, to its sound design, to its very mechanics, coding, and AI. Because of this, I think it's fair to say that Elevator wins this matchup. If Oliver's was going up against a weaker candidate, I think it could have maybe won, but Elevator is just a generally more high-quality experience with less to complain about, which means it comes out on top on this battle. There's really not that much else to say. It's just, when you have a game like Oliver's, with its empty art style and mediocre mechanics, compared to Elevator's fully rendered 3D graphics and a slightly better gameplay, it just really can't compete. The two games are on entirely different levels of quality, so it honestly shouldn't be a surprise that Oliver doesn't move on, while Elevator does.
Much like Ender said, Last Day Live at Oliver's is definitely a game that could have made it to the middle matches if it had been going against most other games. It's just the fact that the Elevator is just a better game overall. Because of this, the Elevator moves on to the middle matches, while Last Day Live at Oliver's does not. And finally, we have the matchup of Tomato Town versus custom amount of weeks in the Game Jam. Tomato Town is a simple, quick, and enjoyable game with a few mechanics that base itself around the TV, while the Custom Night game is also an enjoyable game, but with just much more content. With that being said, I think it's safe to say that the Custom Night game is better. but I can explain why. When previously going up against other games, simple games like Tomato Town prospered because of the bigger games having a lot going for them, but just lacking in enjoyability, and quite often very buggy. But now that it's in the middle matches, they are going up against games that are overall much higher in quality, and most likely have the enjoyability factor while still having more content. Because both games are equally fun, and the custom night game is just better overall because of the extra content, is without a doubt the custom night game moves on to the next set of matches, while Tomato Town does not.
And I mean, if you really need proof of this, you can just go back to previous parts of the videos where we talked about Tomato Town and custom amount of weeks in the game. Tomato Town, we specifically mentioned over having a lack of mechanics, but being able to immerse the player enough to really not have that be an important factor. Meanwhile, custom amount of weeks of the Game Jam is packed with mechanics, most of them being actually pretty interesting. Like, for example, the main feature of the game, creating a Game Jam game within a Game Jam. Aside from that, you did actually have a few interesting mechanics regarding a few different characters. Okay, how many matches was that? Let's see. Alright, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4? That's it? We're done? Really? Okay, well, that was a lot faster than I thought it was gonna be. Like, jeez, I was, yeah, no, fast. But anyway, now that we filtered through the 8 games that have reached this far, you know what time it is? It's time for the next set of no, we do this joke every time. It's intermission time. I don't know what you expected. I'm out of here. Hey, so apparently last intermission, if he was trying to contact you guys or something, I'd like to say he's clinically insane. Don't listen to anything he says.
This is literally 1984.
Now we have the 2 final matchups, the 2 final sets of games, a battle between 2 games per matchup. You get the drill. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering, the reason why I say final 2, if you haven't been listening to like any parts of the videos, is because that last matchup on the bracket isn't actually a match, it's just going to be the games that are going to be moving on to the final bracket, so they don't actually compete against each other, not in this video at least. That being said, the games that have made it this far have proven themselves to be fun experiences that have a lot going for them. So whoever wins out here and moves on to the final bracket definitely will deserve to. Let's get going. Matchup number 1, Outlet versus Night at the Park. And at first glance, one's gonna realize, wow, both these games are surprisingly similar. Let me explain. Both of these games have unique mechanics which make them stand out from the rest of the crowd, thus giving them a defining feature which makes their games all the more memorable, which is a really good feature to have in this game, because I'm gonna be honest, if I'm writing the script and I forget what your game's about, that's not really good, I'm gonna be honest. Besides that, they have both generally standard FNAF gameplay, which goes along actually pretty well with their new mechanic in both respective cases, even if a few complications are caused on both ends with said new mechanics. Whether it be with the power box for Outlet or the phone signal for Night at the Park, these games are genuinely similar in how they are presented. So how do we judge 2 games that are outstandingly similar in terms of presentation? Well, let's be honest, common sense dictates that we judge the things that aren't involved with whatever the similarities are. Ergo, this leads us to bugs. Yeah, glitches. While these games may generally have a similar presentation, Outlet is a much more clean experience than Night at the Park. While Outlet is by no means glitch-free, they're just genuinely less prevalent than they are in Night at the Park, at least from what we've seen from both of these games. Aside from glitches, what else can we compare? Well, yeah, art, actually. Yeah, it's just that simple, really, not even sure why I have to do these bits. Anyway, in terms of art, these are a bit weird to compare. Outlet has some very weird and inconsistent art style choices in certain parts of the games that looks fantastic in some areas and just plain weird in others. Night at the Park has a more mediocre but, more consistent art style. With this in mind, comparing art is not an option. They both have some strengths in some areas and some weaknesses in some areas, and it's not really clear which one has more strengths or weaknesses in either area. Besides this, there's not really much to really compare, so let's do a little bit of summarizing. The major defining factors between these games is the glitches themselves. Plus, not to mention, Night at the Park generally was less polished, even besides the countless glitches. Outlet didn't have this issue, which is why I'm inclined to say that it comes out on top here, even if not by much. I gotta say though, both games are pretty solid experiences. Outlet moves on to the final bracket and is a winner of Bracket 1. Night at the Park put up a good fight, but does not move on.
Now we have the Elevator going up against custom amount of weeks in the Game Jam. This one is definitely a hard matchup because both of these games are high quality, good art, good gameplay mechanics. There just aren't enough in these games to really critique for. mean, sure, they have their flaws, but both have an equal amount of flaws that balance each other out in a way. So how are we supposed to judge either game when both are equally good in their own way? Well, it's annoying to have to resort to this, but I think I'll have to resort to simply how much I enjoyed playing either game. Or at least I thought this would be an annoying decision, until I actually started thinking about it. The Elevator is a well-made game, sure, but when it comes down to the enjoyment factor, I really did not have that much fun playing this game. It is really well polished, it has good gameplay, it has good art, but when I played the game, I just didn't have that much fun. It felt so slow and tedious, while my experience at the custom night game was just much more enjoyable. The custom night game just has better pacing overall, while the Elevator was slow and took a while between each action, as well as having to type individual codes on a number pad that didn't even show numbers on it. So when it comes to how much I personally enjoyed each game, the custom night game moves on to the final brackets, while the Elevator does not.
And there we go. It's done. 17 games, only half of all the ones submitted to the Game Jam have been reviewed and have been placed. Custom amount of weeks in the Game Jam and Outlet all move on to the final bracket, which will be releasing sometime after the other half of the games are done and dusted. Don't get too comfortable, of course, because the final bracket does actually mean something. The two games that ended up winning here are not guaranteed in any capacity to actually fully win the Game Jam, so they still have a ways to go. Besides this was a fun time. I'd like to personally thank each of the developers in these videos. Whether you made a good game or a game that was, less enjoyable, I also thank you all for participating, as this Game Jam could not exist without you guys. And while yes, we did look at a lot of these games to a very critical light, you should understand that we are intentionally looking for things to criticize, because that's the point of it all. There can only be one winner after all, and even if we criticize your game a bunch, that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad.
That's gonna be all for me for this Game Jam, but there's still 2 more videos to go. Ender will be reviewing the other bracket with someone else, as well as the final bracket. So see ya, losers. I get to escape from this stupid little basement. Can I please have my $5 now?
Yeah, sure. Just so you know, I have Canadian dollars, not US dollars, so you're only getting maybe $3.99 in American dollars from these 5 Canadian dollars. So
What the f-
see ya. Hey, so as of the time I'm recording this, 1 US dollar actually equals 1.27 Canadian dollars. So you actually made some money. Good job, Beefy. Looks like your investment actually paid off.